Hey y'all, so this is not Shady Talks. This is actually a new concept that I told y'all about on my live last week. I'm going to call this Poli-Side-Eye. Basically, political side-eye. It's going to be a politics version of pop roast, as you will. And with Shady Talks, I enjoyed my guests so much and educating me on political matters that affects me as well as y'all. I was just like, can it just be like a recurring guest on my channel? So yeah, it's going to be called Poli-Side-Eye. And this is Jared Clemens or JC Tiger Fan. I'm sorry for using your government. But for the one and final time, you're going to explain your background so, everyone gets accustomed to you on the channel.
So my name is Jared. I am a PhD candidate at Duke University. I study political science. So I study everything from how capitalism is ruining our lives to white racism and everything in between, and kind of how they merge together to create America. So that's pretty much me in a nutshell. But I also like music and movies and fun stuff too. So I'm not just entirely boring.
And he is not single, ladies and gentlemen. So please do not go in his DMs with the bullshit.
No sliding in the DMs.
Right.
Please.
I'm single though, so y'all can continue to be in my DMs. Anywho, I wanted to name this episode Joe and Kamala Take Office. Are we really free at last? This is a day to celebrate, because the Senate race or whatever, but as we're filming this right now, we see that we are a nation under siege by racist white hicks. So I don't even know where to begin. So we basically have 2 weeks, 2 weeks until Kamala and Joe. It's sad that I'm saying Kamala and Joe and not Joe and Kamala. It's whatever. But it's crazy. We're 2 weeks away from 45 not being in power. I refuse to say his name. Are we on the right track? And is there hope?
Depends what you mean by hope. So 2 weeks is it's seemingly a short amount of time, but it's a lot of time when we have to deal with who. So I like to say I'm hopeful about things. I'm not necessarily optimistic. So let me draw the distinction between those things. So I'm hopeful because we have at least stopped the bleeding somewhat. But I would like to say we haven't gone under the knife yet. We just kind of have a tourniquet kind of wrapped pretty tightly there. But that could easily be snipped, as we can see. So I'm typically a glass half full type person. So I try to look at the silver lining in every situation. Mm-hmm. There's certain things about the Biden presidency that I think is going to kind of exacerbate some of the underlying issues that we have with this country. We can kind of talk about what some of those are. And I just don't have faith in the Democrats there's an opening. I just don't have faith in.
Oh, Jared is a cynic, y'all. He's more cynical than I am. Just a little FYI, so get used to his cynicism.
Yeah, so as somebody who studies political economic systems kind of for a living, you kind of read about some of the way that these things have been theorized about. And yeah, I'm not confident that Democrats if they have the reins to really fully, there's an opening. Taking advantage of an opening also means being able to identify that there's an opening and exploiting it. I don't think that they have the capacity to do that. Mm-hmm. So that's what worries me more than anything else. But, we'll see. Maybe they might surprise me. I mean, I want my $2,000 check on day one. That's what I do.
Oh, yeah, I want my $2,000. Really. But what do you say to people that, look at his cabinet. It's so progressive. All these women, all these people of color, people that look like us. There has to be something to look forward to.
I would say that I would ask people to look beyond just representation. So yes, listen, if all else being equal, I would rather see one that is not all white men versus one that is. Let me put it that way. Mm-hmm. That being said, that is not in of itself enough to put us on the road to the promised land. And my fear is that.
But when people that look like us vote in our favor, though?
So we have somebody who looks like us in the Supreme Court. His name is Clarence Thomas. Ooh, we currently have someone who looks like us, who is currently the head of the Housing and Urban Development. Ben Carson looks like us. We had someone who looked like us, who was once Secretary of Defense, i.e. a war criminal, Condoleezza Rice. So all I'm saying is there is plenty of evidence that can show that that in and of itself is not enough. Now, do I think that someone who looks like us might, all else being equal, might put us in a better position than someone who doesn't? Potentially, but we have to show that. Like, we can't assume that. So my fear is that Biden is focusing solely on kind of the representation or the diversity without actually looking at the types of policies and politics that some of these people are endorsing. Again, I do not want to see every position of power held by a white man, like, obviously, but we can't stop the analysis simply at what race or, you know, or gender or whatever that the person is. We have to also look at their politics. And I feel like when you do that, immediately people are like, well, you're just being a Debbie Downer, like, let's celebrate this. I'm just like, well, this is why you do something called due diligence. I mean, it's not, you can critique somebody without bashing them.
Right. But I mean, of course, like, we're not looking at people that just look like us. I mean, of course, I'm looking at their policies too, which I can go into a segue with Warnock. Like, I know that this person's a Democrat. I know that he's going to help us pass legislation in the Senate that we need to be passed. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fair, my contention is that, especially with like cabinet level positions, I mean, obviously with elections, it is very much as we like to say, it's not about the lesser of two evils. I mean, it really is. I mean, you don't get to, it's not a build a senator factory. Like, you don't get to make your ideal candidate and then vote for them. You have to pick what's put in front of you. And if it's going to be between him and that android Kelly Loeffler, like, obviously, like, yes, like
Kelly, right?
Yes, exactly. Like, you know who she reminds me of? Do you remember the movie Mars Attacks?
Oh, I saw the picture. Yes.
Yes. So there was this one scene in Mars Attacks where the Martians kind of went undercover as like this like stoic robotic white woman who just didn't say anything. She looked like she was just going to malfunction at any moment. Like, that's who Kelly Loeffler reminds me of. Huh? Yes, exactly. That's what Kelly Loeffler reminds me of. So if the options are her or Warnock, well, obviously, like, it's a no-brainer. But so elections, I think, are a little bit different than when we're talking about like cabinet appointments, where we actually have to understand kind of their political background and think about, like, what do these appointments mean? Like, they're not elected positions, so we have to interrogate those, I think, a bit further than we would in an election where you pretty much are left with two choices.
Mm. And can we just unpack, like, just how historical his win is? I'm thinking, like, what? There's no more than, 12 Black senators ever? Or I know I may be misspoke.
Not even that much. Maybe not even that many. So let's see, I think there were a few right after Reconstruction, but then once, you know, whites started whiting again, that and started suppressing the vote, it was like 60 or 70 years before there was another Black person in Congress. So
but even in the South, I think he's the only Black senator from the South.
Ever to be elected or currently?
I think ever to be elected, right?
Post-Reconstruction for sure. Okay. Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, that is we have not had that many Black senators, period. I mean, you can count on probably two. I mean, we've had one in Carol Moseley Braun from Illinois, Kamala, obviously. So now Warnock, so that's three. Cory Booker, so that's four. I mean, so yeah, you could. The fact that we could sit here and like I could put up my finger and do like a 3-year-old, like, so yes, it's definitely historic, and so I don't think we should undercount that. But I do think that we should also, like any other elected official, hold him accountable if he's not supporting policies that, I mean, for me, that's anti-capitalist, particularly anti-imperialist, and so on. But also, he's in Congress, so I recognize he's constrained in a lot of ways, so you have to be somewhat reasonable about what he can do. Mm-hmm. So I'm not expecting him to save the republic, like, by any stretch.
Right. And Ossoff is still pending, of course, but I mean, I can't even check the news now because the Capitol's being overran. We'll get into that later.
He's gonna win. All the votes left are in like DeKalb County and stuff. Like, he's good.
Right. And I planned on open a bottle of champagne on camera and pretend like I'm drinking McConnell's tears. But, they just have all this chaos going on TV. But seeing that, the historical win, from both candidates, honestly, in Georgia of all places, can we thank Stacey Abrams just a little bit? Can we? I know off camera we had our back and forth about deifying political figures, but I really do think that Stacey Abrams really came through.
Okay, so let me clear the air because I don't want people trying to drag me and saying I'm not supporting Black women and none of that. We can give Stacey Abrams her flowers. I have no issue with people acknowledging the work that she has done in organizing, especially in the state of Georgia, where we know there's been a history of suppression and all of these things. My only point was that I saw way too many analyses that only looked at Stacey as kind of being the savior. In fact, I saw some people can we just clone Stacey? I'm like, or we could actually look at the things that she did and see how this might apply to other places. So
I was just going to say that, but yeah.
Yeah, what was going on the ground? How did she connect with people? What types of issues were resonating with folks? How did she, these are the types of questions that need to be asked, not just, can we clone Stacey? So my point was not saying that we can't acknowledge the work she's done, but if we're really serious about trying to replicate that on a broad scale, we have to look at the details. And I thought that was notably missing from some of that analysis. That's the only point I was making.
That's fair. And the work that she has done, I'm just hoping that maybe in the near future, we can do that with Mississippi, that is super Black, Louisiana, and Alabama. I think it's possible. Don't you think it's possible?
I think the chances are more immediate. So in North Carolina, for instance, I think that is a state that I think is already kind of on the cusp of being, if you look at the vote, 45 only won by, I think maybe about 30,000 votes. The opportunity is there. Same with, to a lesser extent, Texas. So I think that there are some areas that could immediately tip us over. And then there are some states I think that it might be a little bit more difficult, not because part of the reason that Georgia was able to transition so quickly is because you also have Atlanta, which is heavily cosmopolitan. So you kind of have this coalition between not only all the Black voters that Stacey registered, but also a lot of these kind of transplant yuppies, essentially, who increasingly, you don't quite have that same dynamic in Mississippi or Alabama or Arkansas, but it's definitely possible for sure.
Because honestly, when I was at LSU and I got the vote for the first time, this was I'm gonna show my age here. It was Kerry and Bush, right?
Yeah.
In 04?
Yeah.
04, yeah. I was just so I didn't know shit about politics. I was just thinking, Black ass New Orleans, and we red? Really? The whole state? And then, I didn't think, oh, well, New Orleans is just one city and not everyone votes. So I don't know. I just thought, why isn't Louisiana blue right now?
So funny enough, we kind of have a little bit of recency bias with this. Many states in the South, it's particularly Louisiana. Louisiana was actually a solidly Democratic state up until about, actually, I think the 2000 election was the first, well, can't really count the Reagan years. He swept pretty much both elections. So even California and New York went Republican for Reagan. So I think you can kind of throw those out. But other than that, Louisiana had been a solidly Democratic state since pretty much post-Reconstruction. And same was true with a lot of other Southern states. So really the transition really started to happen a lot more recently than people realize. I think people kind of have this belief that the South has always been this Republican kind of stronghold, but that's not true. If you realize that things haven't always been this way, then you can consider ways to change these things. But if you are under the impression that this is the way it's always been, then you're more inclined to think that it's always going to be that way. So I think it's important to articulate that it hasn't always been that way.
Right. And just seeing how the turnout was in Georgia, I'm what if just people voted like that for lower level elections, for DAs, and people vote for judges too, right?
It depends on the state, but in a lot of states, judges are elected.
What's another lower level that we vote for that has a lot of power? Which I'm saying, like, whenever there's like police brutality, something that affects in that area, like, okay, well, we should have voted for this.
City level or municipalities, like sheriff is actually a pretty big position that in a lot of places is elected. And turnout for those types of races, if you get 10%, like you're doing well. And so, I mean, I do think it's important to not just put that all in like apathy. Like in a lot of places, there are a lot of structural constraints. For instance, many of these elections are like on Tuesdays. A lot of working people don't get time off to vote. So if you don't get time off, like it comes down to, am I getting a paycheck or am I voting? Then, I mean, I'm just saying, like, so you have to think about stuff like that. But yes, if we did have kind of that type of mobilization like we saw for this election on a mass scale, I definitely think it could transform electoral politics.
Right, and since we're projected to have an all blue Senate, all blue House, like I'm pretty sure they can make Election Day a holiday.
That might be tricky because I think Election Day requires, I'm not 100%, but I think it requires a constitutional amendment. Like we talked before, like there's thresholds. So there's a simple majority, there's the filibuster-proof majority, which would be, simple majority means you just need 51 votes, which they'd have now. Filibuster-proof majority means you need 60 votes.
Right.
So they
wouldn't
wouldn't
have
have
the holiday.
It's not about the holiday. It's the fact that they'd have to amend the Constitution to do that. Because I think that Election Day is constitutionally mandated to happen on a certain day. So I'm not 100% sure, but I think I remember reading that somewhere that to make it a holiday would require some type of a filibuster-proof majority.
So going back to Joe and Kamala, like, you know, having hope. You know, a lot of people are excited about I always want to call her Kamala just because I'm from New Orleans and it's just how I pronounce shit. So if I say that, y'all, like, don't be coming for me. Anyway, Kamala, like, everyone's excited for her. What does a vice president do? And like, what is their power?
So they really don't have many. So they are considered they're the president of the Senate. So pretty much it's just a ceremonial role. So all they do is in the case of a tie, they can break it. So, I mean, that's not really much there's not really much specified in the Constitution as to what the vice president does. So to kind of give you a bit of a funny like anecdote about the vice presidency. So when LBJ, Lyndon Johnson, who was Kennedy's vice president, who before he became Kennedy's vice president, he was actually the majority leader in the Senate. So obviously a lot of power. And so when he was approached to be vice president, he was originally hesitant to take the job because in his own words, the vice presidency wasn't worth more than anything than a bucket of warm piss. To say essentially that the vice president doesn't do anything, they're just there. That has changed over time. So as the bureaucracy has grown, as the size of the federal government has grown in a lot of ways, the vice president has taken on more and more responsibility. And so although there's no like specified power, like it is the case that they are much more kind of present and much more visible. So typically presidents are increasingly giving them more and more responsibilities. So, I mean, I don't know what Joe is going to ask Kamala to do. My hunch is probably a lot because he's old, number one. So he probably just doesn't have that same verve that he once had. But also she's been in the Senate, like she understands how Washington works. So I think he'll definitely leverage kind of that expertise, especially because he's been out of the Senate for some time now.
And I also feel like you're a shoo-in to run for president the upcoming election, because I'm sure he's not going to be trying to get a second term. I think he's going to be one term.
That would be pretty unprecedented. The last time we had a president who didn't run for a second term was LBJ, actually. And I mean, technically, he had 2 terms. That's not to say that it wouldn't happen. I'm just saying it would be a new trend because we don't typically see the case where people don't run for re-election. I mean, he'd be old, really old if he ran for second terms. I don't think he would say that now because for obvious reasons, but I mean, we'll see.
So present day going on right now, can you believe what's happening right now with this chaos? How crazy is it when Black Lives Matter, the National Guard is called like that? With this, it's like they literally just waltzed in. Like you got people taking pictures from Nancy Pelosi's office.
Yeah, they were in the chamber, the House chamber, actually.
Yeah. How? How did this happen? This had to be staged. Security details should be investigated. 45 should be investigated. He needs to be removed today. But I know that's not going to happen. We see white privilege working. Can you believe this happened?
Actually, I can, only because I've read so much about how capitalist societies operate. So there's this one really good book that it's a very long book. It's very dense. So, but if you were curious and
I'm not going to read it, but somebody out there.
I was going to say, if somebody in your audience wants to read it, the name of the book is Caste, Class, and Race. So essentially, the book is about caste systems, about class systems, and about race. Surprise. The author, his name was Oliver Cox. He's since passed away. He was a sociologist. The whole point of the book was he's writing this book during World War II. And so like at the time, he's trying to really kind of contextualize like fascism, or what we understand fascism to be. And like what he says is it's important to realize that fascism is rejection of capitalism. So we live in a capitalist society. It is deeply contradictory. It is grossly unequal. Like the fact that, you know, the top 1% has like 60% of the wealth or 80% or whatever crazy an amount it is now. He argues that eventually it's gonna give way. Something's gonna happen. Either people are gonna demand more of their government, a social democracy kind of organization. So thinking kind of like your Bernies and your AOCs, like asking the government to do more for working people and things like that. Or it could go towards what he called like a nationalist socialism, which is one that is very much anti-immigrant. It is racist. It is all of these things. Like there's no in between. So I felt like we were at this juncture where we had one of two ways. And this is kind of, so no, I wasn't surprised. The question then is, what do you do about it? And I think that is the harder question to answer. And I don't have an answer to that.
Well, I'm still going to have optimism come 2 weeks. Hopefully it's not a shit show. I feel like it might now. Even as we're talking right now, something big is probably going on right now. Okay, so last question. What do you think Joe Biden should do on day one?
Good question. So on day one, they have to get this vaccine situation debacle settled. Like that has to be, well, first I want my $2,000 check. Like Joe said if he won, $2,000 checks will be out the door the moment he took his hand off that Bible. I want my money. But after that, they need to figure out the vaccine situation, because that has just been an abstract failure in so many levels. That's going to have to take, I think that's going to be the first task at hand. Because honestly, like I was reading the other day, they were saying that we should have had at least about 20 million people vaccinated by the end of December. Like that's the rate at which we should be vaccinating. And I think we've had slightly more than 1 million. So at this rate,
country is the ghetto.
Yeah. So what's crazy is that a lot of the vaccines have just been like sitting around and expiring. Like they haven't been like storing them properly. So you just have all these cases of vaccines that are just expiring. So he has to figure that out. He has to figure out a way to get it distributed. I think I was reading that he said he was gonna sign Marshal of Defense whatever authorization act to, essentially that is just so you can use all of the resources of the military, because we got money for the military, and so if we ain't got money for nothing else, it'll be that. But so I think they're going to try to use those resources to get them distributed quicker, but that has to be step one, because otherwise we're going to be stuck in this COVID situation for like forever.
And just to let y'all know, I did do a video on the vaccine, trusting the vaccine while Black. Please check that out. On day one for me, definitely take care of COVID. I want something about, the money is my money. I want it now, of course. And I want 45 in jail. I want somebody like, right, he agrees. I really want him in jail. Somebody need to go to jail. But anywho, y'all, that's it for Poli-Side-Eye, where we break down the American political system for the average Joe, Jamal, and Janet. So I think we're going to do this maybe once a week or bi-weekly. You never know. It could be any topic that's going on right now. So thank you, Jared, for joining me on this.
It was a pleasure.
Right. Make sure y'all like, comment, and subscribe. And Where can they find you?
So I'm on that Bird app, so Twitter, JayC Tiger Fan. I think that's my Instagram too.
Yeah.
I'm also on Facebook, although not really, but yeah.
Yeah, follow me too, CDIGGI1, of course. Thanks for joining us, and I will see you soon. Probably some housewife shit. All right. Bye.